Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one covers the topic of forgetting. Now, forgetting is rather a wide topic, as you probably know if you've ever forgotten anything, and there are lots of different ways in which it's possible for us to forget things. So I've broken it up into two lectures. And what I'm going to be talking about in this lecture are basically the two most common ways we tend to think that we forget. And I'll get the ones that are slightly less common, or at least not as obvious, in the next lecture, in part 2. Now, forgetting basically is memory loss. We're losing memories, we say. The memories are gone, we say. And so therefore, if you ask people what happens when you forget, most people would probably say that what happens is your memories go away. They vanish, they fade, they're gone, you don't have them anymore. Now that's called the memory decay theory. The idea is that memories over time, like if you leave a piece of cloth out in the sun, it'll fade. Well, maybe with time, memories fade. They fade, we don't have them, they're gone, we lose them, etc. They're simply not in our head anymore. Now researchers, this is old research. This is from the 20s. Researchers decided to try to figure out whether or not forgetting actually involves memory decay, or whether it involved something else that might be going on. And so what they did is they took a group of people, randomly divided them up into two groups. This should sound familiar since you've been through the experiment part. And then they had both groups learn a list of words. One group, after learning a list of words, was asked to go out and live their normal life. They were asked to go out and go to work, go to school, read, listen to the radio, whatever it is that they would normally do. The other group was told, essentially, to go to sleep. And they went to sleep. Now, members of each group were then pulled out at hourly intervals. Each individual could only be pulled out once, but they would pull out, 5 people at an hour, 5 people at 2 hours, 5 people at 3 hours, and they would ask them to try to recall as many memories as they could. Now, one would think that if memory decay is what was going on, that if with time these memories simply fade away, that both groups would lose memories at the same rate. And in fact, the people who are awake might not lose the memories as quickly, because even though they were told not to rehearse or think about these words, maybe they did. And so the researchers thought, well, if memory decay is true, then both groups should lose memories at the same time. This is what they found. The group that was awake, well, both groups, after they were asked the list of words, basically remembered, 85% of them or so. They were at almost exactly the same level. But then the people who were asked to be awake after learning the words, crashed and burned. By the end of 8 hours, they were down to maybe 5% of the words that they could remember. On the other hand, the group that was asked to go to sleep declined, but declined much more gradually. And they actually leveled off at about 50–55% of the words and stayed there. So it doesn't look like decay necessarily is what's going on. Now, as it turns out, we actually have a confounding variable here. We have an extraneous variable, because it looks like it's when we're asleep that our mind decides what memories to keep and what memories to get rid of. As I'll talk about in the next lecture, we don't have to keep memories of everything, and so if we don't really need it, we throw it out. So yeah, this is probably not as perfect as it could be, but that's pretty dramatic if you look at that. That's fairly impressive. So what else could be causing people to forget? And the researchers came up with the idea of interference. Just like memory decay, interference is named exactly what it is. The idea here is that other information interferes with your memories, prevents you from remembering them. It may prevent you from putting it into your memory in the first place, or prevent you from retrieving it. But there is something there that's interfering. There is something there that is blocking. And that would make sense. I'll go back to that. I'll go back to that page for a minute before we jump into proactive. It might be that when people are awake, what is happening is that they memorized a list of words, and when you're awake, you're surrounded by words. Okay? You're hearing words, reading words, saying words. When you're asleep, not so much. It might be that when people are awake and they learn these words, that other words are interfering with their ability to remember them. The people who are asleep would not run into that. Now, as it turns out, as I have unfortunately spoiled you for, there are two types of interference, it appears. The first is called proactive interference. Now, proactive interference is when old information, things you already have in your memory, are blocking your ability to learn new information. Old information is blocking new information. That's proactive interference. And the example I like to use here is a phone number. The odds are all of you have probably changed your phone number at one point or another. You've moved, you went to a different cell phone carrier and didn't transport your number, you went from a home phone number to a cell number, whatever. You've probably changed your phone number. And if you're anything like me, you've probably found that for the first week or two after you get this new phone number, you have a terrible time remembering the new one. Because what do you want to remember? You want to remember the old one. People ask you for your new phone number. You're like, wait a minute, I got to look it up. Because what you want to do is give them the old one. It's almost like somewhere in your brain, don't take this literally, but it's like somewhere in your brain, in your mind, you have a slot that says phone number. And you can only fit one phone number in it at a time. And that when you have your old phone number in there, basically, you can't put the new one in. That old phone number somehow is blocking your ability to remember the new one. Okay? It's the way I remember this, by the way, I have a terrible time with interference. I probably have some sort of interference preventing me from remembering it. But the way I remember proactive is, I gotta admit that I occasionally suffer from insomnia, and so I'm up all night watching TV, and there's some weird things that are on TV in the middle of the night. But what I often wind up watching, because it's the only the only thing on, is a commercial for an acne fighting product called Proactive. And the whole tagline for this is that Proactive not only fights the pimples that you have, but it also prevents new ones from forming. Seriously, that's how I remember this. I think of that commercial. If we're preventing new zits from forming, we're also preventing new memories from forming. That's proactive interference. That old phone number is preventing you from remembering the new one. However, notice that once you've managed to bash that new phone number into your brain, you may find it very difficult to remember the old one. I moved a number of years back, and as it turned out, I was keeping information under my old phone number on a website, and I needed to get that information. But I'd had my new phone number for a month or two, and I couldn't for the life of me remember my old phone number, even though I'd had the old phone number for 18 months. I had so completely, got that new phone number in that I couldn't remember the old one. I had to go look it up on an old resume. When new information blocks old, that's called retroactive. Retroactive is when new information blocks old information. Okay? That's retroactive. If you know what retroactive means, that's pretty much what retroactive means. If you pass a law and it's retroactive, it means it's not only valid now, it's also valid in the past. Or maybe you get a pay raise that's retroactive to the first of the year. That means you're not only going to start getting more money from here on out, but they're going to pay you what you would have earned, all the more money that you would have picked up from the first of the year. You're going to get a nice big check. So proactive is when old blocks new, retroactive is when new blocks old. And we really do think this is interference, because with interference you would think that the more similar the information, the more blockage you're going to get, and that's exactly true. Phone numbers can be very difficult, because phone numbers are just a string of numbers. In terms of home addresses, however, I usually find it fairly easy to remember my new home address, because my addresses are very different. Now, if you live in a city where you move from 5th Avenue to 14th Street, that might be a little different. But, when I'm moving from Paddock Club Drive to Beach Drive, it's fairly easy to remember and to be able to tell the difference between the two. So the more similar the information is, the more likely you are to have interference. The less similar the information, the less likely.